Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session on microformats, data formats that put humans first. My name is Tontek Celik. I'll be your host for the next 75 minutes or so. And I'll walk you through what are microformats, some examples thereof, some demonstrations. That's probably my BlackBerry. I should probably shut that off, huh? All right. All right, no twittering during the session, apparently. I try? Almost, there we go. All right. So, before I get started, I'd like to let everyone know that this entire presentation is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Means you can go ahead and take it, record it, mash it up, sell it if you wish, give it yourself, customize it, etc. All I ask is a little attribution. Okay, so since this is a Microsoft conference, in all fairness, I really should disclose that I actually worked for Microsoft for over 7 years, even though I'm currently at Technorati. And more disclosure, I worked on Internet Explorer for the Mac. And while at Microsoft, also represented Microsoft in W3C, CSS, HTML, and a little bit the Xforms working groups. And worked on browser engines for a variety of set-top boxes that never ended up shipping, unfortunately. Anyone here work on a set-top box? Anyone? Over there in the back? If someone offers you a job to work on a set-top box, I strongly consider not taking it if you want to ship something. But that's just been my experience. And I worked on a few other things at Microsoft that I can't talk about, unfortunately. But you might be able to find some folks in the audience that know about it. I'm not going to name any names. All right, but that was so long ago. Now I'm working for Technorati, and I'm going to show you a quick little demonstration to illustrate microformats. So this is a contact page for Technorati. Looks like any other contact page you might see for a company, a little form and address, phone number, etc. Except there's this little link down at the bottom. It says Add to Address Book. So if you click that, and if the network is behaving, you'll see that it automatically goes ahead and adds Technorati's contact information to my address book with a single click. So what just happened there? That Technorati contact information was marked up in the HCard microformat. Okay? And then that hyperlink to add it to address book sent that to an HCard to vCard converter. How many of you know what vCard is? You've heard of it before. Okay, most of you know what vCard is. There's at least 2 implementations of vCard probably in every device you have, in your cell phone, in your laptop, etc. So that simple hyperlink, no JavaScript involved, converted the HCard on the page to a vCard, sent it back to the laptop, where its content type was recognized as being a vCard, and the operating system directed it automatically to the proper application. On the Mac, clearly that's the address book. On Windows, you'll see it pop up in Outlook. And you got seamless import into a typical address book application. So what is an HCard? Let me just walk you through how simple the code is right away. Here's a really simple HCard that has simply a link and name information. So if you're marking up a hyperlink and a person's name, you might use ahref, maybe a couple of spans, maybe a div around the whole thing. This is the key piece right here, these class attributes, these class values. So class equals vCard indicates that the contents inside this thing are an HCard. Now, we reuse the vCard name from the vCard standard exactly as is. We try as much as possible here to just take the property names as they were in the vCard spec, RFC 2426. So the next properties you see, class equals URL, FN, and N, are also indicating that the semantics of those properties are present in that element. In other words, the URL of this HCard is contact.com, and inside the N, you see the given name and the family name, which are explicitly marked up. And that's it. That is an HCard. So it's literally as simple as adding a few class names to content that you probably already have marked up. You may need to put an extra element like the span or so, but typically that's pretty harmless. Okay, so how did we get from HTML web authoring to conceiving of microformats to HCard, right? This all started many years ago with the adoption of cascading style sheets. And how many out there write HTML for a living? Or just have written HTML by hand? Anybody, right? Okay, probably like 89% of you. How many of you have written cascading style sheets by hand, CSS? Again, the majority of you. Okay, great. So one of the things that CSS enabled was taking the style out of your markup and putting it into separate files that you would share across your site, right? Getting rid of your font tags, getting rid of using tables for layout, that kind of thing. And letting you return to using HTML what it was intended for, what originally was designed to do by Tim Berners-Lee, which is to express semantics. And we've actually even encapsulated this practice of using semantic HTML with a new term recently called POSH, which just stands for plain old semantic HTML. We figure you've got POX, the plain old XML, but I don't know most people that want to catch a POX, but plenty of people I know that want to be POSH. So we picked that acronym. In addition to using semantic HTML, the key here is that web designers and developers have already started using class names in their HTML to mark up additional semantics beyond what HTML provides you and to express the information architecture of their site, of the elements on the page, etc. So another aspect of the microformats is recognizing that there are solved problems out there, that we don't need to solve every single problem as if there were no previous solution. So starting with HTML, which has an excellent framework for marking up documents, and looking at the class attribute, which allows you to sort of overlay additional semantics into those documents, we say, hey, there's some existing ways to solve these problems. And reusing vocabularies saves you a lot of time. So there's a lot of people that love to make up names. And I like making up names as much as anyone else does, but it takes time to do so. And therefore, is not necessarily the best use of your time. So if you can simply use someone else's names, like a framework, like a template, then that'll save you time with your authoring. Finally, reusing common vocabularies also shares meaning. The whole point of putting information on the web is what? Is to communicate it, right? We're trying to share information with each other and even with other coders, other developers. So if we all make up our own terms for things, that just results in the Tower of Babel, right? You're not going to actually communicate. However, if we actually use shared terms and with shared meaning, then we can communicate better. Finally, the microformats realized that we needed a community to express and capture all this development going on among shared meaning, among shared vocabularies. So let me show you exactly what microformats we've started to work on. We tried to prioritize on the most common problems first. We figured, okay, there are lots of aspects of information on the web that aren't captured by HTML. What are the most common things we can represent? And simplest, for that matter. So when microformats first started emerging back in 2003, they started with XFN, XHTML Friends Network. Blogs were really taking off, blog rolls were taking off, and everyone was using their blogs and their blog rolls as kind of a virtual social network. Friendster was taking off at the same time as well, and a bunch of us said, well, what if my profile, I want my profile to just be my blog or my homepage, and that links to my other friends' profiles, which are their blogs, their homepages. I'm already doing that. Why not add a small tag like rel equals friend to indicate that that hyperlink is a friendship relationship? Next, rel equals license was introduced for sharing licenses, and I'll go into that further. Shosha was introduced for representing lists and outlines. For people and organizations, HCard, which I already showed you, and for events, HCalendar. These are the biggest problems that we solved first. So let me show you another demonstration. If you go to barcamp.org, which is a community site for unconferences, in fact, there's a Barcamp tonight that you might want to take a look at. You might see that up in the top right here is a little subscribe to HCalendar link. You say, well, what is that? Well, if you click on that link, what will happen is, assuming that you have a computer that's set up with a calendar program that can subscribe, for example, any Mac with iCal.app, or if you've got the recent Outlook 2007, it supports ICS as well. You can simply click that link, and it'll pop into your program, your calendar program, and subscribe to that calendar. Now, what's going on here? I was just on a web page, right? There's a bunch of events here. And by clicking on that subscribe link, here it is again, it goes to my calendar program. It says, OK, go ahead and do that. And you see that now, with a single click, I've got a subscription to all of those. And if I change this auto refresh to say every day, now whenever I sync my BlackBerry or Windows mobile device or whatever to my laptop, then all the events that are being updated on that web page are automatically synchronized to my mobile device, my alarms work, all that works. It's all a real-time live solution. It's kind of like what RSS is to news, iCalendar is to events, right? ICS is to events. And you can see there's lots of bar camps coming up. So again, just like the HCard example, we've got an HCalendar, in this case, markup on the Barcamp wiki page with the HCalendar to iCalendar converter, seamlessly in a hyperlink, same way, so that you can actually subscribe. Not just copy the events, but subscribe. Because one of the things we've noticed about events is they change fairly often. Events get created, they get destroyed, they get moved by a day or an hour. Their details change, their locations change. So you want a subscription to this kind of information. And you don't want to have to go back to a site and copy and paste it. So as I was saying, Outlook 2007 and Apple's iCal.app both support ICS, so this will work for those programs for most desktops. And here's the key thing. If you've got a website and you want to publish ICS, let's say that your users of your website, maybe you publish an event website, for example. Maybe you publish a upcoming speaking occasions website. Or maybe you just publish soccer schedules. And your users say, well, I want to subscribe to that in my calendar program. Could you please implement ICS? Has anyone heard that request on the website to implement ICS? Anyone? A few people? OK. Here's the catch. Implementing ICS is a huge pain. If you think cross-browser HTML and CSS is difficult, you don't know anything. Because ICS, cross-calendar program ICS support is even more difficult. Getting that format correct, outputting it, writing the code to produce it is non-trivial. So we've essentially captured all those quirks of the ICS format in this transform from HCalendar to iCalendar. So you as a web author, all you have to do is add a few class names to your calendar events that you're already publishing on the web and a link to convert them, and you can get ICS support. So here's the key. If someone asks you for ICS support, the shortest path to that is actually HCalendar support and a converter. So here's an HCalendar example. This presentation I might link to. My presentation is actually online. I'm giving it from the web right now. And you have a title of the presentation, you have the date, right? Just like the HCard example, here's the key HCalendar piece. So it starts with class equals vCalendar, which comes from the iCalendar specification, RFC 2445. And this is a name that is legacy from vCalendar, the vCalendar proposal, which preceded the iCalendar specification. But they didn't change the names either. So the IETF folks that developed iCalendar decided to stick with the vCalendar name. So for the same reason as we developed HCalendar, the HTML version of iCalendar, we stuck with the same names as well. So vCalendar, you could have more than one event, but let's say we're just going to show one event for the sake of discussion. Again, class equals URL for the link. Class equals summary for the brief summary or title information. And then the time of the event is used with DT start. And here we have an interesting construct, because what we've done is we've taken and split the human readable date and the machine readable date. Dates and times are actually very difficult to get right in terms of producing something that's reliably parsable, reliably understandable by computers, and something that humans can reliably understand. Dates and times have international or localization quirks. You know, we might say 4/6 to mean April 6th here in the US, whereas in Europe you would say 6/4. And you get ambiguities like that. So we've put the title attribute here as the expansion for this abbreviation, because people oftentimes say, oh yeah, it's just today. So we've put exactly there in the ISO 8601 format, 2007-04-30 T 1330-0700 for the time zone. And that's it. So what are microformats? They enable the publishing and sharing of higher fidelity information on the web. With HTML, you can publish headings, you can publish paragraphs, block quotes, definitions, definition lists, unordered lists, ordered lists, all kinds of semantics, citations, right? But not everything. There's no person tag in HTML. There's no event tag in HTML. And these are two very common things people publish. Microformats are basically filling that need. Even more than that, by providing a format, an open standard format for exchanging this information on the web, we actually empower users and sites to support them to share their information, to control it, to move it around, whether they want to move it from one computer to another, copy and paste it between applications, or maybe between the web and applications. They're just small bits of HTML. So one of the key pieces of microformats is you don't have to be a programmer to understand them and to use them. That's a very deliberate design, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. Finally, they're the fastest way to produce an API for your website. So in this whole Web 2.0 bubble that we're in, one of the most fashionable things to do is no matter what kind of website you have, to provide an API for it so that people can take your website and mash it up with another website, combine it, mix and match it, maybe produce some JavaScript that brings it all together. Oftentimes, that API is nothing more than the data that's already on your website recast in a different format, recast in XML, recast in JSON, et cetera. So by actually marking up the data that you're publishing on your website already with microformats that can be parsed by libraries, there are libraries that parse hcalendar, hcard, et cetera, in a variety of different languages, you've essentially opened up an API to the data on your website. Now, that might not let you do everything on your website, right? It's not the full set of, say, RESTian verbs that you might want to do in terms of like deleting and putting and all that kind of thing. But it's a first step. And for a lot of applications that are simply taking information from one site and another site and mixing them together to produce a richer experience, microformats will do the trick for you. And you don't need to be a programmer, like I said, to add them. So are microformats just better markup? Right? Web designers have been doing microformats for quite some time, right? They just use class names and they're done. Well, sort of. So first of all, microformats are built on the solid foundation of what we call semantic HTML, POSH. The key here is that, as with HTML, they're broadly human readable, writable, editable. How many of you have actually created an account on MySpace? Yeah, I know, it's hard to admit. But I can say, yeah, for testing purposes, right? That's OK. A lot of people have. Millions of people have. I think they even have over 100 million profiles on there, right? Anyone know how you customize your code on MySpace? HTML. You copy and paste HTML. Sure, there are little wizards that will build the HTML for you. But fundamentally, there are 100 million kids, right? Kids, in quotes, editing and producing and copying and pasting HTML. That's amazing. These people aren't programmers, right? They understand just enough to do it. And so by building on that, you've got a really broad reach. Finally, by building on the whole concept of semantic HTML and separating style and markup, you make your code much more maintainable, much easier to update, in fact, much easier to collaborate and work in teams. The other key benefit you get from semantic HTML is what we call better default behavior from user agents. How many of you know what a user agent is? OK, maybe like 5 or 10% of you. OK. In simple terms, a user agent is what the W3C calls the class of applications that you might think of as a browser. So a browser is a user agent. It's something that consumes HTML off the web and produces some result. But there are other types of browsers out there. So when you produce semantic HTML, you get results in these other types of browsers that are actually reasonable because they're built to understand and share the meaning that's in the HTML. So for example, screen readers do much better if you use semantic HTML. You get better accessibility. You get better diverse device support. That style sheet for your desktop is almost never going to look right on a phone. Okay. Even if you've got the most amazing code, the most amazing version of Pocket IE that's doing all kinds of backflips to make the CSS look OK on your phone, it's not going to look quite right. And the more that you actually use the semantics in HTML as much as you can, the better result you're going to get by default. But finally, there's one more class of users, and you might say the biggest blind user in the world. Anyone know who that is? Search engines. Search engines don't see images, at least not yet, right? Not that we know of. They don't, they may filter them a little bit. They don't actually extract a lot of meaning out of them. They are essentially equivalent of the world's biggest blind users, and search engines rely heavily upon semantic markup for understanding and ranking the relevance of documents. So therefore, by using semantic HTML, you're actually increasing your search engine optimization. More and more, you'll find that the best results, or the highest results in various search engines, actually have used really good semantic HTML. But microformats are more than all that. Everything I just gave you, developers and designers have been doing for years. In fact, for at least five years or so. What microformats are taking some of those good class names that people are using and applying a set of principles to make them small, applying a process to make sure that they actually reflect current practices on the web of information publishing, and finally putting them through a community so that we minimize duplicates. So I'll just go quickly through the microformats principles that I mentioned. You want to solve a specific problem. one of the challenges that a lot of folks get into when they try to represent information on the web is they say, well, I want to represent cars on the web. Great. And they say, well, what if I actually want to represent all types of four-wheeled vehicles? Let me generalize that format to try and do that. OK, maybe you can do that too. Well, would that include inline rollerblades, since they have four wheels, but on each skate? OK, let's see if we can generalize it to do that. And there's this tendency among most format designers to generalize and generalize and generalize until they have this very abstract format that's very far from what they've actually tried, the problem they tried to solve. OK, that's a trap that almost every engineer, software engineer, falls into. All right, and you end up not getting anything done, or worse, you end up building a format that actually doesn't solve the problem very well that you set out to solve, and does a poor job of everything. So solve a specific problem. We say start with that. The trick is to make sure that each limited mechanical part of the web, each application, is within itself composed of simple parts that will never get too powerful. That was Tim Berners-Lee from a while ago. Make it as simple as possible. Einstein said your theories, your hypotheses should be as simple as possible and no simpler. Well, we actually take that a step further. We actually say your theories should, or your formats should be even simpler than you think is possible. Go ahead and make it too simple and figure out how it breaks, and then add back in what you need. Because most of the time when people think they've got the simplest solution possible, they actually haven't. And you don't find out that you've found the simplest solution until you've actually built one that's too simple and then backed off. Evolutionary improvements on top of simple solutions. If you can iterate quickly, then you can take a simple solution and add to it. Now, this talk is about human-friendly data formats. Now, what do we mean by that? Humans first, machines second. Right? Microformats, as you saw with the demonstrations, can be parsed by machines and help users out with speeding up time with common tasks. Humans first, machine second means, first of all, the information has to be presentable and parsable. Right? On the web, information is seen by millions of users, maybe billions of users. And when you see information on the web, the chances of it being wrong, someone will see that it's wrong and inform someone, and it'll probably get fixed. That's the human part of the equation. If the data is hidden in some side file that's only viewed by a machine, the machine's not going to know to apply sort of common sense checks to that data. It could become out of date. It could become corrupt. It could become spammed. And in fact, that's exactly the kind of thing that happens with meta keywords. So there's a very strong emphasis in microformats of saying, let's take the information that's already visible, that we already know is sort of human checked for the highest quality, and expose that through additional markup. Let's not duplicate that information. This also forces us to reflect current publishing practices, right? I might think it would be great if every restaurant published, say, like the precise calorie count of everything that they put out there. Okay, but they're not doing that today. So even if I came up with a calorie count format to put out there, what use would it be? If no one's publishing the information, then creating a new format is not going to actually change their psychology around why they're publishing it or not publishing it. So we create microformats around information that people are already publishing, and that's a key distinction. We reuse from widely adopted standards. I mentioned before, HCard and HCalendar are built from the RFCs 2426, 2445 for vCard and iCalendar. Semantic HTML. And finally, another quote from Tim Berners-Lee about modularity and embeddability. Microformats are designed by virtue of their simplicity to also be modular, so that you can actually mix and match them together. They're also designed to be embeddable, so that you can use, for example, an HCard inside an HCalendar event to indicate the location of that HCalendar event. You can use an HCard to indicate the author of a review. And finally, we want to encourage decentralized development. It's important that the web was built from this whole concept that any piece of information can be anywhere, right? We try not to mix and match, say, like the meaning of a document with, say, the URL or what domain name it happens to be at. You know, despite the ill-advised creation of the .mobi domain, most folks understand that your contact information you can put on any website anywhere, on any URL. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to end in .html or .php or whatever. And it certainly doesn't have to be on a .mobi domain. So one more short microformat example, linked licenses. So those are the author CSS. You ever put that in a style sheet that's a separate document? and you link to it with link rel equals style sheet. That link relationship is essentially saying this thing over here that I'm href linking to is a style sheet for this document over here. In the same way, we take that analogy to licenses and say, well, this thing over here that I'm linking to is a license for the current documents. So since the analogy fit, we took these hyperlinks that people were already creating to link to licenses for documents and added one attribute, rel equals license, to indicate explicitly that the document is licensed under that license. And that's it. That's how small a microformat can be. That's why we called them micro. So we proposed that back in 2004, and within a month, the Creative Commons license chooser had already adopted it. And within months and years later, both Yahoo and Google produced Creative Commons search that was built on that exact technology on the rel license. Now, the irony here is that the Creative Commons guys went to actually a lot of work to define a complete license schema. Remember I talked about building up a hugely complex, totally general purpose solution to do something? They built this completely complex schema in RDF to represent any license of any piece of content anywhere and all the possible relationships and the contracts and all that back and forth. Well, turned out that's not what got implemented. What the search engines implemented was the simple microformat. Right? They said, oh, well, we can just check to see, hey, if you're linking from this page to this page and it says rel equals license, that's something you're expressing. Now, it didn't solve all the problems. It wasn't a 100% solution. And this reflects another value, another principle that we stick to in microformats, which is we try to solve the 80-20 first. It's much better to produce an 80-20 solution with something that's very simple, that can be immediately authored and implemented by everybody, rather than to come up with a 100% solution that's so complex that no one ever bothers to implement it. So here's a brief history of where we've been with microformats and where we are today. Microformats started in 2004 with a presentation at the O'Reilly Emerging Technologies Conference and essentially proposed for licenses for social networks, for links and outlines, and for vote links. Since then, the community has been very busy and produced a lot of results. Right? HCalendar, HCard, like I've already talked about. Rel tag was introduced for distributed tagging so that you could tag your content anywhere on the web, not just on a particular site. Out of HCard, the ADR and geo microformats were extracted for simple addresses and geo-coordinates. Flickr's implemented geotagging on millions of photographs with the geo microformat. In the meantime, while microformats was going on, so was the Atom syndication format, which was produced and specified really well-defined semantics for syndication. Hence, we took those semantics that were argued about by dozens of really smart people in the IETF, and said, hey, let's just take those same semantics and reflect them in HTML. So HAtom is a set of class names that reflect the precise semantics from Atom and let you simply, by adding those class names to your HTML, represent that part of your document is episodic content that can be syndicated. You don't even need a separate feed. I mean, you can produce one, but now you could even produce one by sending your HTML to some sort of XSLT or some sort of transform that would look at that HAtom and then convert it to Atom. There's a bunch of others there, HResume, HReview. And at this very conference last year, Bill Gates pointed out that we need microformats for things like people, locations, and directions. And so there's actually even been work on a directions microformat, where research has been done on how Yahoo, MSN, and Google all produce directions to see what can be done in common. Most recently, PingerEye.net was launched. This is an updates distributor, something that I helped work on back at Technorati, so that we can actually do real-time microformats updates. So if you publish some microformatted content and you want to notify anyone that wants to find out and index that content that's been updated, you essentially ping pingereye.net/ping/your URL, and notification goes out and is distributed to whoever wants to know about it. The little hyperlinks for downloading vCards and iCalendar, those are our contact and event services that Technorati launched. This is actually based on an open source transform called X2V that's licensed for anyone to go ahead and put on their own website. So as a web author, you can decide, oh, I can just go ahead and use the links to Technorati services. Or if you want to completely produce your own content and have it all run on your site, you can go grab the open source X2V software, install it, and run it yourself. This extension was released for Firefox called Operator, which does this amazing thing of parsing through a half dozen or so different microformats on a page and indicate not only how many there are of each on the page, but all these different verbs you can do with them. It's quite amazing. And if you just give me a moment, I might be able to show you. In January of this month, LinkedIn updated over 9 million profiles, public profiles, with the HResume microformat. Right? This is the broadest adoption of any sort of resume format on the web today now. So if you want to, for example, build perhaps a job search engine or maybe a job candidate search engine, you could now do that. Whereas before, there was no format for doing so. In March, the South by Southwest conference they marked up everything on their site with microformats. So 500 plus speakers on a speakers page, all marked up with microformats. What I just showed you there with the Technorati contact information being added in one click, you can actually add 500 plus speakers' names and URLs to your address book with a single click now, if you go to the South by Southwest program. HCAR's been added to the Wikipedia info box template, which means that any bio on Wikipedia that uses the info box template is now also an HCARD. And just recently today, I got email that the Sunlight Foundation had uploaded their published list of the members of the 110th US Congress to support HCARD as well. So let's see if we can make that work. All right. So here at sunlightlabs.com/API/hcart/index.php are over 535, that number sounds right, congressmen, senators, representatives, right? So you can take any one of these, copy it with Live Clipboard, export it, add a bookmark, add it to your Yahoo contacts, or look at the location of Google Maps or Yahoo Maps, all of these things. So if you wanted to say, for example, add every US congressman to your address book, let's see if it'll do that. Let's see if I can go down to the end here. Did I not update that? This copy of Operator hasn't been updated. The latest version of Operator has an additional command below all the different HCARDs that lets you actually export them all at once. So we could, of course, try and do a live update. Shall we do that? Yeah, somehow they got the top result for the word operator. That's pretty impressive. What's that? Oh, it should? Okay. So, okay, 0.7 is available. All right, well, I'm not seeing it there, so I'll find updates. All right. This is good. Always good to update your software on stage, right? See how well their systems work. Okay, restart Firefox. Sure, why not? So while Firefox is restarting, do we have any questions so far? You want to shout one out? Yes, right here in the white shirt. So the question was, do you know any microformats for project management, task management, that kind of thing? And right now, the closest one that exists is probably HCalendar for dealing with events. But one of the things that the HCalendar is based on, iCalendar, actually has a whole bunch of other little formats inside of it. Like it has the whole V2Do object. And there's an effort inside the microformats community to take that V2Do object inside iCalendar and express it as potentially an H2Do microformat. That's where I would start, so that at least you have a way of capturing, hey, this is a to-do item that's assigned to a specific person at a specific time, and what kind of state is it in. And so if you'd like to look into that, if you look up to-do on the Microformats wiki, it should show up there. OK, so here we are again at the Firefox. And let's see if it'll, OK, leave an encrypted page. Transferring data. It's pretty big, 535 members of Congress, right? That's a lot of data. And this is all thanks to the work of the Sunlight Foundation. And they've created Sunlight Labs, which provides not only microformats, but whole APIs to query information about members of Congress. So you can build mashups now with members of Congress and see what they've been doing up to and where they are. OK, so now we've got 535 contacts. If I click that, if I go down to the end, oops. Thought it was there. Let's see. What if I say actions? That might do it. There we go, export all. Let's see if that works. See what happens. Get a little rainbow spinny cursor as it processes for a while. Let's say continue. Clearly not something you're going to end up doing every day, at least unless all of Congress changes over in a day. But, OK. Well, it looks like it's taking a while to complete, so let's go back to. All right, so I'll talk a little about the Microformats community. Oh, there we go. Whoa. OK. And boom. Just got the entire US Congress in my address book. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that, but if I should ever feel like calling my congressman, I now can, once I sync that to my address book, right? I mean, sync that to my phone. So next time you're worried about something or you see something in the news that bothers you about what the Congress is doing or some policy decision, imagine being able to just like call them right up there on your phone, or at least call up one of their friendly staffers. So a little bit behind the Microformats community. And any of you that are interested in microformats and representing information or have questions, I strongly encourage you to check out these resources. The IRC channel is a great place to lurk and learn. There's people in the IRC channel literally 24/7, because there's people that operate with microformats and play with them across the world in nearly every time zone. There's a discussion list where if there's any general questions about microformats or tips and techniques, there's a lot of people there that can help as well. There's the microformats.org blog itself. Plus, if you want to blog about microformats, express what your experience was, you just tag it with microformats, and people will find it that way. And finally, perhaps the most amazing resource at microformats.org is the wiki. So microformats.org/wiki not only has every specification, we keep our specifications on the wiki so they can actually be fixed and edited, fixed as far as spelling mistakes and all that kind of thing, by anyone potentially. But every piece of research we do to back up the microformats, every technique, everything of that sort is kept on the wiki. So if you find errors, go ahead and fix them. There's several translations in progress. There's almost a complete French translation of the Microformats wiki on microformats.org, which is just amazing. This guy, Christopher Duchamp, I'm probably pronouncing that completely wrong. He's translated nearly every page, and he checks the recent changes, literally like almost every few days, and updates the pages accordingly. Finally, I want to leave you with an exercise for the reader. So just so that you learn how easy it is to create a microformat yourself, create your own H-card. How many of you out there have your own website? Say, like your own blog or your own homepage? OK, maybe about 30%. That's not bad. That's pretty good. If you have a contact, do you have a contact page on that website saying, hey, here's my email, or here's my phone number, or here's my address where you can ship all kinds of goodies, or my Amazon wishlist presents, that kind of thing, right? Put that into an H-card. So use the tips. Use either the H-card creator to play with to see how the markup works, or the H-card authoring tips to mark up your H-card. Add an add to address book link using the contacts feed service, and see if your contact information will import into the Apple address book or into Outlook. publish it. Publish on your sites. Yeah, sorry, publish link. Check it in Operator on Firefox, right? Just that simple little thing I showed you. And the interesting thing there is that there's actually quite a bit of rumor, and you might even say planning, to integrate that kind of functionality into the next version of Firefox, Firefox 3. So pretty soon, just as browsers started supporting RSS built in, you're going to start seeing browsers that support microformats built in. And hopefully, we'll might even see a future version of IE. Although, since I no longer work on that team, it's not something I can directly affect. But you might be able to find some people in the audience that you could lobby if you'd like to. Not anyone in the second row, for example. Add live clipboard support. So this was a great thing that Ray Ozzie and his team built and demonstrated at the eTech conference last year. And it really wowed the audience. So imagine not only being able to copy and paste between applications, which, introduced by not the Macintosh, right? Xerox PARC's Star computer, or Alto, and then popularized in all kinds of interfaces, being able to copy and paste text and pictures. Why can't I copy and paste a person, or an organization, or an event? How come that doesn't work today, right? Well, the live clipboard guys have solved that problem. So if you add live clipboard support to your H-card, you'll be able to copy and paste it directly. And finally, since we do have a wiki, go ahead and add your H-card to that wiki, H-card new examples page. A lot of folks have asked, how do I validate my H-card? How do I make sure it's correct? Well, you can use those tools I mentioned. And furthermore, if you just add your H-card as one of the new examples to the H-card in the examples in the wild page, you'll find that there are people in the community that literally watch that page, watch the recent changes on that page, and will go and look at your code and then indicate problems on that page, if there are any problems. It's pretty amazing. Finally, ping.pingri.net, so you can get indexed by everyone that's indexing H-cards, and add it to the attending section of this event's wiki page. So literally every single event that we do around microformats, we try to keep a wiki page for, like this, where you can actually go ahead and edit it and add yourself down here that you've attended it. And in fact, we should add that session QA and comments, right? Well, I'm not logged in, so I'll let someone else edit it. And finally, this is just showing you that this entire presentation itself has been built with microformats, with XHTML, CSS, show, H-card, H-calendar, rel equals license. As I said, the entire presentation is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. And thanks. So we've got, according to the counter, a little over 20 minutes for questions, which I try to always leave a little bit extra time for microformats because people ask some of the best questions I've found during these sessions. So we've got microphones in the two aisles. They are recording this presentation, so please use the microphones so that the recordings can also capture the questions as well as the answers. So while you guys are thinking of questions to ask or getting up, I'm going to take some photos of you just as you've been taking photos of me. All right, first question.
Hi, it's a little hot. I was curious, is there a canonical validator or like just a mishmash of many validators? Like, is the notion of an official validator for microformat kind of?
There's no official validator yet. The closest I would say is that the X to V transform, which powers the contacts feed service or the events feed service, does a pretty good job of checking to see if your content is valid or not. In fact, there's a version of the X to V service that the author has running on his page, Brian Suda, at sudo.co.uk, that actually runs in a debug mode so that if you have problems in your H-card or H-calendar event, it'll spit you back a little warning message saying, hey, you've got this mistake, this mistake, this mistake. It's not a full-fledged validator. It doesn't test all of the assertions of the specification, but there's a test suite that's been built to test these implementations. So I think there's still an opportunity for someone to write a validator, and there's parsers for microformats that are open source. So a lot of the building blocks are there. It's just somebody needs to assemble them and put like a nice little user interface on it.
guess that's a second question. In terms of the versioning of the spec, is there a notion of like v.9, 1.0, like, or is it constantly evolving thing? Because I know certainly for people that want to target software, the idea that there's a spec to target and that resolving towards kind of one final thing is certainly helpful.
Definitely can be helpful. So the interesting thing is that we've had a few different approaches to versioning. The first is that the approach we took with like hcard and hcalendar has been to essentially say, hey, this just expresses the semantics that are in vcard or iCalendar, and those specifications are known quantities. We're not going to add to the vocabulary. We're not going to add in new properties or add in new values. And that way, there's something stable that you can code against. You know the set of properties, you know the set of values, and you can code against it. So we've tried to keep it relatively stable in terms of microformats like that. Just iterate the specification to when we find bugs. And so to that extent, since most people that implement microformats are actually in the community and they find the bugs, we iterate pretty quickly and say, hey, this doesn't work. We've got to fix that. Another example is hreview, which actually has gone through 3 revisions, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and has a version attribute. Although we've actually been very careful to design the format, design each version of the format to be backward compatible. So if you read an hreview 0.3 document with an hreview 0.2 parser, it would actually still understand the pieces that are defined in hreview 0.2. And that was designed deliberately that way. And as much as we can, we're going to continue iterating the microformats such that they are sort of forward compatible and backward compatible in that fashion. New features are available to new parsers while not breaking old parsers. So I hope that answers the question. Yes, over here.
Hi, I was wondering if you could share your experience with harvesting the web from microformats and in relation to identity, user's identity. How do you associate microformats with particular users who created those and then perhaps create correlations or come up with ways to combine the information, always with identity in mind?
Right. So ways that like parsing microformats on the web combine with identity.
For example, if you want to create a network of friends of a friend, you find a microformat embedded in one web page with a list of someone's friends.
Right.
Do you assume that the URL where that was embedded, the microformat was embedded, is always associated with the same user?
So XFN defines that a person can say, hey, this is my website. I'm going to relate to, I'm going to say this URL over here is another person's website. I'm going to say, I consider them my friend by using the URL, using the website as a proxy for the person, and simply adding like rel equals friend to that connection. And then the other person can link back, say rel equals friend or met or acquaintance, whatever. And so you can assert kind of a social network as a result across these different websites. Now you get a couple interesting challenges with that. The first is that what happens when I have 2 websites that represent me? Say, for example, my homepage and maybe my Flickr profile.
Or even worse, your blog feed.
Sorry?
Your blog feed, which is replicated.
Well, the blog feed is just an alternative representation of the blog. So that's not really a different website. It's just a different format.
But it can be syndicated by others.
Sure. The content, the posts are syndicated by others, right? So one of the things that HAtom does, for example, so the identity travels with the post, is that it recommends putting an H card inside each post that represents the author of that post. But so the first problem, say I have my homepage and my profile on some social network, XFN solves that through what we call rel equals me. So if I link both directions, both from my homepage to the profile and from my profile back to my homepage, which most profiles let you do, and add the rel equals me attribute, then that's a way of confirming that, hey, this is the same person. The second challenge is that you get these social networks that are potentially just unidirectional, right? Friendster has this whole, you get email, can you confirm, is this your friend, yes or no, when someone adds you, right? That actually doesn't really reflect reality, though. In reality, relationships are asymmetric all the time. And so XFN is asymmetric. And that's a challenge that we're going to have to find how to deal with from a user interface perspective. That's an interesting challenge. Finally, I definitely strongly encourage you to take a look at OpenID, which is a way of asserting that a particular user controls a particular URL. So while XFN lets you say, hey, whoever controls this URL is friends with whoever controls this URL, you still don't know who that is. You still don't know if the person browsing controls that URL. And that's the piece that OpenID adds, so that a person, when they're logged in, can say, hey, I own Tontech.com or whatever. Let me do stuff that asserts that to be true. So the two actually mesh together quite well. Thanks. All right. So you asked about XFN. Let's see what's going on here. So here is a search engine that someone built that actually crawls the web and looks for different sites that use XFN and find incoming and outgoing links among them. So let's see, like if I click on Jeffrey Zellman, what does that do? It's been a while since I used this. And I think they use a map to try and determine locations as well. Let's see if that loads. Oh, here you go. So this tells you which relationships the person has with which other people. And it's been crawled. To see what that loads. There you go. Kind of showing you a visual map of that person's relationships that it's found by crawling the XFN links that are found on their page, other pages that link back to them. All right. Any other questions?
So I have a question. I tried at one stage to work on getting a new microformat defined to do with data related to blood glucose readings. And,
related to what? I'm sorry?
Data related to blood glucose readings.
Oh, blood glucose readings.
Yeah,
okay.
because there's a lot of different devices out there. They all seem to have their own formats. There's no reliable way to transfer data between devices. And the feedback I got continuously is you should try and use existing standards that already are out there, but there are no existing standards in some cases.
Okay.
And so there's not a lot of guidelines about how to try and establish a standard, especially if you don't have, a group of people that you're working with, because none of them are interested in working with one another.
It is challenging. Right, the companies are all interested in remaining proprietary, right?
Yeah.
Until at least two of them produce something that can interoperate, and then all of a sudden you'll get network effects.
Right.
But the key is how do you get that, and then how do you evangelize those two to cooperate? The challenge there's a couple of different things you can do. So the first is that Microformats is not going to solve every data format problem out there. I mean, it's great for the web, but admittedly, if you've got two random devices that are just trying to exchange information, and none of that information is ever going to make it to the web, it's not clear that Microformats is the right answer for you. However, that being said, if you did research on the web and looked for how are people publishing information about blood glucose levels, right? Is anyone publishing information on blood glucose levels? I don't know, right? That's not an area that I'm an expert in, so I would have to leave that to you. If you found web pages that were doing so, that would be a great starting point for saying, okay, let's at least start with, if we could mark up the information on those web pages that publish blood glucose information with a microformat, that could form the seed of a standard interoperable format for exchanging blood glucose information, right? Once you've gotten that, so that at least across the web, you can share and exchange blood glucose information, getting it into devices is the next step. So then you would define a format by seeing, well, first of all, like you said, researching to see if there's any existing formats. There may not be existing formats as far as electronic data formats, but there's probably forms. I would guess that doctors have standard forms they fill out to indicate blood glucose levels.
It's a very small amount of data. The amount of information is basically date, time, and a level.
Okay. And maybe the units, right?
Yeah. I wrote a paper that was published in a diabetes journal on this issue, proposing microformats as a standard.
Wow.
And have not received any feedback so far. And so it's one of those things where, based on blogging about it, there's a lot of interest in the user community, but the manufacturers could care less. And what you're mentioning makes a lot of sense, but remember, for most people, this data is proprietary.
Right.
And so they don't want to be publishing information that's private in a public space, but doctors are starting to use websites to download data from their patients and to match data in various interesting ways. And so I could see it being used in private intranet kind of situations. You can't get access to those, so you can't determine if anyone's using them.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I would say still look for see if there's any public examples, and if there are, that's a great place to start. You know, even about like fictitious patients or something like that. And then hospitals are bastions of forms and bureaucracy, right? Every form, every paper form in a hospital is essentially a format. I mean, it's not electronic, it's paper physical, but it's essentially a set of fields and a set of values. And so even if it's as simple as, like you said, date and time and measurement value, those measurements still have units, right? And capturing just even that information would be useful. So there's a page on the Microformats wiki called The Process, microformats.org/wiki/process, which encourages you to start with step 1, collecting examples in the wild, if you can, find them. And step 2, collecting existing formats. Existing formats don't need to just be web formats or electronic formats. The forms, like I mentioned, you could use as well. And it sounds like you might have something very simple to capture. In fact, you might even be able to say, okay, that's an event that occurs, right? You capture that information, it has a date and time, and the remaining piece you're trying to capture is a measurement of a quantity, and it probably is applicable to a particular person, right? So that's probably an H card. So there's some bits of that you can encode today by using H calendar and H card, and maybe some sort of a, you know, some little bit of posh, a little bit of semantic HTML to capture the measurement. Start with that, and then see how the community can, deals with that. If that seems to make sense, if that works for today's real-world data, you can then move that to being like brainstorm a microformat based on that. If information starts getting published in a proposed format, then eventually you have something from which, even if you can't get the device vendors to adopt it precisely, you may still be able to write transformations in the community that take a proprietary format and transform it into the microformat, and vice versa. And once you get enough of those transformations done to this common interchange format, then whether or not the device manufacturers support it, you've got the tools necessary to interoperate. So good luck with that.
You mentioned the South by Southwest email H-card example and also Barcamp.
Yes.
Have you seen any movement with APIs dealing with taking presentations either in PowerPoint or other formats for like conferences like this and South by Southwest, so that you can kind of get like what the author's emphasis is? You know how you're always, when you give a presentation, rattling off what this URL or this RFC, or for example, in your case, have you seen any movement with APIs to kind of like serialize, like a PPTX or some other presentation file and grab those links out?
So there's the format that I used in my presentation. So this entire presentation is built with semantic HTML and microformats. It's built in a format called S5, so you can go ahead and take a look at this. You can, it's just taught.com/presentation/2007
I got the URL.
formats, right?
Thanks.
You can go ahead and view the source and look at it and literally see that it's got really simple markup. It's like, okay, it's a slide, it's a list item, and there's some code, and it's inside a pre-code block. There's some more code that's added to it to do a build, right? What you're talking about, though, is sort of like pointing out what are the key elements of a presentation, the key essential bits.
So instead of going by the Southwest site and just getting people's email, you could pull up the profile of a certain speaker and say this is their links from all their presentations or their presentation, and then if the links look interesting, then maybe you want to look at that video or
yeah, and I think for
PowerPoint.
things like topicality, like what the emphasis is, that's something that tagging can solve that problem. So literally just like look at the presentation, I'm going to blog about it when I'm done here and say, hey, here's my presentation. I'm going to tag that blog post with various tags, like microformats, like maybe RFC 2426, H-card, H-calendar. And so then you can see like the list of topics that are emphasized.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, tags are probably a good solution for that. And it looks like, even though the counter's to 7 minutes, people are filtering in. So if there's any more questions, I'm going to be here up at the front for a few more minutes. But thank you very much. And if you have a moment, go ahead and edit the wiki and add yourself and add any of the questions you asked or that were answered. Thanks a lot.